Here's an historical flashback, something you might call a dispatch from the, quote, "we're all in it together," unquote, archives. It's about the Reverend Cotton Mather. Now, Cotton Mather is known as a kind of a puritanical preacher of the early 1700s, but not as many people know that he tried to introduce immunization to this country during the Boston smallpox epidemic of 1721. Now, the medical and political and clerical establishment of his day didn't think that was such a great idea. In fact, they were deeply resistant to it. Why? Well, we can talk about that for a second, but first let's talk about where Cotton Mather got the idea of immunization. One of the enslaved people in his household, a man named Onesimus, told him that he had been cured of the disease back in his African home through inoculation. Now, Cotton Mather didn't get this from God or prayer or insight or his own brilliance. He got it from a person that had been enslaved and brought to this country involuntarily. Now, Cotton Mather didn't trust Onesimus. In fact, in his diary, Cotton Mather wrote that Onesimus was, and I quote, "wicked and grows useless, froward," which is an old word meaning uncontrollable, and immorigerious, which means rebellious. Now, these are eminently reasonable, and I would say mild responses to a situation of enslavement. Any human being would be likely to be froward and immorigerious under those circumstances. But as far as we know, Onesimus never resorted to violence, despite the extreme violence used against him. He did tell, and he did share his life-saving knowledge with Cotton Mather. Now, Onesimus's nonviolence was not shared by Cotton Mather's fellow white people, because when he went around to the establishment of Boston in 1721 with his idea that you might take a pinprick and infect somebody with this disease, and then they got somewhat sick, but they wouldn't get it and they wouldn't spread it, with the response of at least one of his fellow white Bostonians was to throw a hand grenade, a crude hand grenade, through his window, which, had it succeeded, would have burned Mather and his family and his enslaved people alive. So we know who the civilized person is already in this narrative, and he's the one without his freedom. But Mather kept going. He studied the subject of immunization. He learned that it had been used successfully in Turkey and in China, as well as in Africa. So he tried to make the case to the leading doctors of his time. Some people went along with it. Many, perhaps most, did not. At least one of the people who disagreed with him wanted to kill him. They were, of course, living in terror and fear, which doesn't bring out the best in people. But the bottom line is this, and perhaps the moral of the story is this: most of Boston's elites found it impossible to accept the idea that new healing techniques could come from dark places, and so instead, they died.